It's me. Hi everyone, welcome to the show. So today we're going to talk about my credentials, my resume, my diagnoses. I've racked up quite a list. You can call me mentally the illest. We're also going to chat with my friend Andrea a little bit later about her experience getting diagnosed with ADHD. But before we get into it, let's see what the cards have to say for us today. You are safe to create a life that feels right to you. Cry. It's true. At the end of the day, you don't have to explain to anyone why you do something. It's your life. So if you were stuck on something, I hope that brought you some clarity. You deserve to feel safe. Hi, future me popping in for the first of many disclaimers in this episode. Today you're going to hear me share a lot of really personal stories about my mental health struggles, and I'm going to be touching on pretty much every sensitive subject that you can think of, so please take care when listening. A lot of my story involves misdiagnoses and my opinion on the validity of those diagnoses, so you're going to quickly notice that I don't have a lot of faith in the psychiatric system. They have failed me time and time again, and in my opinion there is a huge problem in the mental health systems, and I'm not really referring to like therapists or social workers. Psychiatry seems to be missing like a major connection to humanity, and I have a lot of friends who work in psychology and mental health, and this doesn't seem to be like the most radical opinion. A lot of people seem to agree that this is a problem. My experience with psychiatrists has always been quite cold and lacking empathy, and usually focused on very clinical black and white theories rather than any emphasis on my lived experience or present moment issues. I often wonder if the heavy emphasis on childhood and background sometimes creates a bit of a unconscious bias that isn't always relevant or helpful. The history of psychiatry itself is very complicated, especially as a female patient, but they hold the most power. I mean, they're doctors. Disagreeing with them feels so wrong. Now, one diagnosis from a psychiatrist has essentially made it nearly impossible for me to get the type of care that I need, and it wasn't even a diagnosis, it was a suspicion of traits. But we will get to all of that. What I really wanted to make clear is that everything you hear in this episode is my opinion. I want to really emphasize that it was still doctors who helped me get the care that I needed. It wasn't psychiatrists, it was family doctors, but it was doctors in medicine nonetheless. I don't want any of this episode to come across as villainizing medicine or doctors or the value of these systems. We really, really need them, and you can't go through these types of journeys alone without the help of doctors. It's really important for safety. I'm not a medical professional, and I'm only here talking about my experience to hopefully, broaden our horizons and help us all start to be more comfortable with questioning the systems that are in place, because ultimately they're there for us and we should be receiving the type of care that we need. This is only to start a conversation. So I do hope to inspire you and, share my opinion, but I encourage you to make your own and to do critical thinking, do your own research, and remember how personal health is, and what works for me and, the approaches I take might not be the right ones for you. You know yourself, so just really practice that critical thinking, especially whenever you're listening to content like this that's, questioning really large structures. I just think that's a really good practice. Okay, let's get into it. So my mental health journey started when I was about 17, 18. I was ill for a few years before that. Obviously, I was a depressed teenager. I was struggling with an eating disorder. But I say that it started when I was 17, 18 because that was the first time I asked for help. My incredible sister just sprung into action and found an amazing resource in Toronto called Sheena's Place. It's a really special place. If you need it, go to it. If you can, donate to it. When I went into my first group therapy session, I was so surprised by the absolute diversity of people that were there. Mental health really just does not discriminate. It doesn't pick a certain type of person, a certain type of look, a certain type of job. It does not matter who you are. Mental illness is like a little demon that could just come grab you one day and you don't even know about it. Now, through Sheena's Place, I met my first therapist, who I continued to see for 4 years, and she totally changed my life. One of my favorite things I ever learned from this therapist was that two truths can exist at the same time, because this was my first foray into mental health healing. So I was hard on myself. I'm a perfectionist in every area. So I'm like, if I'm going to heal, I'm going to do it right. I just kept being like, oh, I want to be better. I want to be better. And she said, well, yeah, okay, it's great to want to be better, but that doesn't mean you're not good enough now. Two truths can exist at the same time. Holy crap, was I mind blown. I mean, that sentiment really changed my life. It's been a guiding force in my existence since then. Just because something else is happening doesn't negate the first thing that's happening. Multiple things are existing at the same time. And I know that's a really simple fact, but it can be hard to remember when you're in the throes of mental illness or just in the throes of daily life. We forget that there are things happening outside of us. My relationship with my body and the way that I talk to myself really changed after I met this therapist. Our soul can't really take a joke. So if you're saying things like, oh my God, I'm so ugly, or like, oh my God, I'm disgusting, and you're just joking about it, your soul doesn't actually know the difference. So it's taking that as like a little hit. Think of like a little kid that doesn't understand sarcasm yet. Like, ow, rude, mean. So be careful of the way, like the things that you vocalize out loud, because if you constantly talk bad about yourself, you're gonna feel bad about yourself. So start saying things that are positive. And if you want to make a self-deprecating joke, do it in a sarcastic tone. Like, wow, I am just a bundle of joy right now, when you're actually being a complete asshole. You know what I mean? Be careful with your words. Another thing that this therapist pointed out to me was that I had some budding issues with addiction. She was like, you tend to use substance sometimes to deal with your feelings. Did you know that? And I was like, no. So at this point, I'm 19. I'm starting to heal my mental health. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so on top of things. I book an amazing job that takes me overseas for 10 months. And I decide to go sober because what a great idea. That lasts for about 6 months. A really tragic life event happens while I'm on the contract. And the first thing I do is go straight to the bar and get wasted. At this point, things started to go really downhill for me. I had buried memories. I had a long distance toxic relationship. There was so much happening. So my mom calls me and she's like, hey, I think you're depressed. You need help. I'm going to call a doctor. Bless my parents. Yes, I'm really grateful to have supportive people around me, but I think that they were able to see that I was struggling because I had said I was struggling a few years before. That first time that you reach out for help is the catalyst for the rest of your journey. So if you take away anything from this episode, take away that. Ask for help. You can't do it alone. No, you literally can't. I promise. I've tried. So my mom gets me into the doctor and I go to deal with this depression or whatever is happening. I go to the doctor and he talks to me for 5 minutes before being like, I think you might have ADHD. I'm like, pardon? I do the test. I score so high. He's like, yeah, you're definitely depressed, but I think you just have like really severe ADHD that has been untreated for a long time. Oh my God. Everything made sense. My whole life made sense. I struggled as a child a lot, interpersonally, in school, just in most areas. I was struggling. There's been a really big rise of neurodivergence. Well, not like a rise of it, a rise of awareness about it. The neurodivergent people have always been here, obviously. People are starting to really recognize that a lot of their issues that were blamed on other random mental health things might actually just be a cognitive difference in their brain. I was 23 when I was diagnosed with ADHD, which was pretty late, but that's nothing on my friend Andrea, who was diagnosed at 39. Now, Andrea is like the coolest person ever. We became really close friends when we were working together on another brand, and our friendship was actually a little bit of a catalyst for Andrea to go get diagnosed.
Remember when you told me you drank an entire carafe of coffee every morning?
I know, and I didn't know that I had
think
ADHD.
About that sometimes.
A whole pot every day.
And I was like, oh, I'm the same as this girl. We get along really well.
Might seem right.
But it actually was like good because I had tried to get diagnosed before, or I'd mentioned it before because I was in therapy during the pandemic and I was like, I think I have ADHD. And my therapist was like, no, I don't think so. Or she was just like, or that's not the issue. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I didn't pursue it, and I should have.
I've had a psychiatrist tell me it wasn't real.
Ooh,
like that's
what?
So yeah, she looked me straight in the eye.
But they're a psychiatrist.
Yeah, I was shocked.
Like, do they think depression is caused by the moon?
I know. Tell me about it. She basically acted like I was trying to get meds.
It's like really well documented that like stimulants are a great treatment for ADHD.
Like,
and it's like part of the reason that you get diagnosed is to get the stimulants.
What else was I supposed to be doing?
I am seeking out the meds. I'm seeking out the meds so my brain's not sad at me.
No, literally, give me the meds. When you found out you got diagnosed, was it just freeing for you?
Well, you know what? I self-diagnosed. And it's just really funny because everyone's like, you can't diagnose yourself from Instagram. I totally did.
Yeah, you can.
I had to fill out some tests.
Yeah.
This is actually very funny. I had to fill out a questionnaire from my doctor, and then they were going to refer me, this is my family doctor, refer me to the psychiatrist. And actually, they wanted my parents to fill it out. This is hilarious. I'm 39. They want my parents to fill it out. So we actually sat down on a family Zoom call, and we all talked about it together, which is very sweet.
That's really beautiful.
In the middle of the family Zoom call, my brother brings in the dog and has put the dog in my Kirkland sweater, and we got all distracted. And I was like, the whole family, we fill out this form. I go and I diligently like upload it through my doctor's system.
Okay.
And then they write me back and they're like, we lost it. And I was like, They're like, can you fill it out again? And I was like, And then she sent me a 90 questionnaire. And I was like, I don't want to fill this out. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm being diagnosed for ADHD and you're asking me questions about how I was when I was 8. I'm 39 and I just don't have the time or patience for this. And she goes, oh, well, do you want me to put down that you refuse to fill this out? And I was like, oh, so I'm the difficult one because your technology didn't work well and I resent having to do this. I'm a grown-ass person.
Oh my God.
It was so silly. So I tried to remember everything that they had said from the shorter questionnaire. Yeah. And then I just guessed on the rest of the answers.
Hell yeah.
And then when I went to see the psychiatrist, I told him that I'd done that because I was just like, that's a waste of time. They were wasting my time. Like, and I'm sure he worked there. I was like, oppositional.
I was going to say that was probably when he was like, definitely ADHD.
Doesn't want to follow rules. No attention to detail. Check.
Refuses to do a 90-page questionnaire purely because has already done it and it's bored.
Is bored and is mad that your technology doesn't work properly. But like sometimes some of the questions are like, this is hard to answer. I don't like, even though you're like trying to go and be like, here's the most terrible things I've ever done to convince them.
Yeah.
And you're like, why do I have to like say these things?
It's hard. I know.
It's really funny because like I've read things where people have had like tons of testing or whatever. We had like an hour convo and he's like, yep, here's a prescription.
For sure. You know what? It was similar for me too. I actually wasn't even asking about it. I just walked in and he was like, you have ADHD, eh? And I was like, oh, really? Yeah, he gave me a test. And it's funny how obvious it is to some people. And you're like, how did I go this long then?
Do you know what's really funny is he's like, you're definitely hyperactive, but I think it's a little bit more mild for you on like the like internal side. And I was like,
did you tell him about your 80 hobbies? Maybe that's why it's more mild.
I did.
You've been putting that
He's like, you're hyperactive? And I was like, sometimes.
Have you made a lot of adjustments in your life now that you are diagnosed? Like in the way you approach things?
You know, the biggest adjustment is just not being hard on myself or as hard. Yeah. Guess what? That frees up a lot of brain space.
I bet it does. That must feel really good.
Yeah.
Well, rejection RSD, right? Rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
I don't get it anymore thanks to Concerta.
Yeah, medication is everything. Like, it's so crazy the first time you take it and your brain, like...
I wonder, too, if there is the difference between me being diagnosed later and if I'd been diagnosed younger, in the sense that it's really easy to be very self-accepting, or it is for me at this age. And so when you're saying, like, what have you adjusted? A lot of it is just the thought process of, like, not beating myself up, just being like, that's okay. And then that combined with life experience, you can be like, oh, I've been through that experience 5 times. Yeah. And this is what I did. Yeah. And then it turned out okay. And then you just don't have the like overthinking.
That's actually really interesting.
That's what's happened for me anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think you're a really self-aware and proactive and like independent bad bitch kind of icon.
Oh my God.
So
what are my bad qualities?
Sort of makes sense. You don't have any.
Oh my God.
Honestly, I find like it's funny what you say about like the time difference because 23 is a pretty vulnerable rough age. It's right before the brain hardening.
It's hard.
But 39 is like you're fucking it up. Like your life, you're on track. You know what you want. You know your boundaries. You've gone through your Saturn return. Like you've done your work and your healing. So because I felt like such a grieving period, and I was wondering if you felt something like that where you were like, what would I be like? What would I have been like had I have known?
I don't feel like it's terrible where I've ended up, but I do think I could have done more if I sort of knew what was going on.
Right. What's been your way to like deal with that and accept what can't be and what just is?
Ooh, good question. Well, some of it is it's kind of like, okay, well, at least I know now. Right?
It's true.
And then it's like, okay, well, I can make different choices now. And then I guess the other thing is like, well, it's not like I wasted my life. I still learned things. I still had fun times. I still went and did stuff. I had a lot of fun.
So true.
You know, it's
ADHD
like...
is fun.
It is fun. Also, the other thing is like, everyone's life and job kind of sucks right now. You know what I mean?
So true.
And this is not like put on like anyone in specific, but like sometimes you see, I'm sure you have people in your life you see and they hustled and they hustled and they hustled and you see to where they got and then like maybe they burnt out or maybe they don't want to do it anymore or maybe it's not rewarding. And so sometimes you go like, you know, I really wanted that goal, but like maybe it's okay that I didn't get it. You know,
like being okay with changing your mind or being okay with different, like what ended up being.
Yeah. Or like sometimes you get something and you're like, oh, that was really what I wanted.
Radical self-acceptance, like just like radical acceptance of what is. Yeah. Because it's true, you can't go back. And at the end of the day, you could argue like both sides. You could argue that maybe I would have gotten this, but would I have learned that lesson if I hadn't made that mistake or that approach? Like it's all part of your experience, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I'm not broke.
Hell no.
I never went bankrupt.
Don't need to be fixed it.
Didn't murder anybody.
Hell. Great. That's a win.
Nobody murdered me. I'm
Perfect.
good. Life's good.
I think that's great. She just has a lot of hobbies.
She has a lot of hobbies.
Maybe a lot of like doom bins around the house. Things like that. I have never met anybody in my life with so many hobbies.
Oh, okay.
List them.
Hold on. Before we get into that.
Okay.
I remember at one point Googling, what does it mean when you have so many hobbies? And I think at one point it was like an ADHD thing.
No way.
Yes. Also, people keep trying to get me into rock climbing, and I have to refuse.
You would be so into rock climbing.
I can't have another hobby.
Do you not have time? Is your like time like with the level of hobbies that you have in your life?
I don't even get to all my. I've reached polysaturation on my hobbies.
Okay. It's out of control now. So after I got diagnosed with ADHD, it wasn't really smooth sailing after that. The medications that my family doctor put me on were just not the right medications for me. You know, it's not necessarily his fault. He had put me in to see a psychiatrist immediately, but I would have to wait 11 months before I saw the psychiatrist. And by the time I did, I had already had a nervous breakdown and gone to rehab. Things had taken a bit of a turn. So I actually finally got in to see this psychiatrist while I was in rehab, which, by the way, is a totally different story that I can tell you all about another day. This was essentially rock bottom in my life. So I was like really, really unwell. On top of that, when I went into the rehab facility, they took me off of all my medication. So I was on no medication whatsoever, seeing this psychiatrist for the first time. And she said, listen, I don't think you have this disorder. You don't meet all the criteria for it, but you're showing a lot of traits of BPD, which is borderline personality disorder. These diagnoses could be really helpful for people. For me, this was terrible. I think BPD is like the modern day hysteria for women. Okay, that was a bold claim, I know, so let me tell you what I mean by that. First of all, what is hysteria? Well, fun fact, the word itself actually comes from the Greek word hystera, which means uterus. This is where the belief started that women experience physical or psychological ailments relating to their womb, which of course we know today there is some truth to that. It of course manifested into something far different. By the 19th century, hysteria became a popularized term to describe basically any woman struggling of anything. Tired, hysteric. Anxious, hysteric. Sexually frustrated, hysteric. This is problematic for a million reasons. And if you want to read up on the history of that, please feel free. I have been dying to do an episode going super deep on the like women's health and stuff. So if you're interested in that, please leave me a comment with some of the subjects you'd like me to touch on, because I would love to know. But let's get back on track. Why am I comparing hysteria to BPD? Well, BPD is essentially a collection of symptoms. Something I found weird was basically every mental health issue or condition I had ever experienced was listed as some sort of symptom. So eating disorders, a symptom. ADHD, a symptom. OCD, anxiety, depression, all symptoms of BPD. I found this really weird. It felt like it was more of an umbrella term than a helpful diagnosis, and there were no treatment options for it. It's my radical belief that many of these personality disorders have served as a replacement for hysteria. And this isn't too crazy because hysteria was officially removed, the term hysteria was officially removed from the DSM in 1980. And that same year, a lot of personality disorders were introduced. It's starting to seem like a lot of women who are presenting with, emotional issues are being written off with personality disorders. The main problem with BPD is that it comes with a ton of stigmas against it. So many mental health professionals believe that they are intreatable, violent, crazy, unpredictable, attention-seeking, and even going so far as to call them weak, blaming their symptoms on a simple lack of ability to deal with their emotions. This stereotype that those with BPD are incurable is so harmful. I was basically told it was just the way that I am. I won't get into too much about how much it totally destroyed me at the time, but I will tell you that she was wrong, and I was able to heal many of those traits, if not all of them, with mindset shifts and therapy. I have felt the direct effects of this stigma, and I only had a note on my file that said shows some traits of BPD. It wasn't even a diagnosis. And yet this one note has led to future mental health professionals completely ignoring my needs and ignoring my care, instead blaming all of my symptoms on BPD. But I was still struggling with many things: auditory processing problems, cognitive difficulties, sensory issues, a million things. These issues were never addressed. Nowadays, with just a little bit of research, we can see a huge crossover of neurodivergent or autistic women being misdiagnosed with personality disorders. There are tons of studies coming out about this. I've attached a few to the episode so you can do your own research. Now, that is not to say that some of these personality disorder diagnoses can't be helpful for some people. If they have been helpful for you, that's amazing. There is not one truth to this. I want to emphasize that, again, this is only my own belief and experience. I just want to bring attention to a larger issue and just encourage people to feel validated to question these diagnoses if they want to. Okay, back to it. I'm seeing this psychiatrist. I'm now sober. I'm on no medication. What do? I make an attempt on my life because I'm not okay. I land myself in the psych ward, and this psychiatrist sees me the next day. She goes, I think it's the BPD, but you're also showing some signs of anxiety. I was not having a great time. Then I get in a horrific car accident that leaves me with a traumatic brain injury and permanent damage the day before my last appointment with her. And I went in and she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I just got in this like terrible accident. And she's like, well, are you still sober? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, okay, so that's what I was seeing you for. So I can't see you, like, it's still our last appointment, but if you want to keep seeing me, you'll just have to go in for another referral. And she just dropped me. And that was my last appointment. It was crazy. First of all, I also wasn't seeing her for sobriety issues. I went to see her because I was depressed. Anyways, I'll give them this. I did expect it. This is the public system. I was not given the care that I needed. But what did I do? I put in for another referral because I needed help. And this time I specified that I needed help for ADHD medication. They asked, what are you going to the psychiatrist for? I said, ADHD medication, period. So I go to this psychiatrist, this new psychiatrist. She sees on my file, a couple years ago, they said that you had BPD traits. I'm like, yeah. She's like, so I think that's the problem. I'm going to put you on an antipsychotic medication. All right. I know that medication takes a long time to work. I gave it a good go. 6 weeks later, I feel nothing. I'm definitely happy. I definitely don't have any problems because I'm not thinking about them. I don't give a shit about anything. I am literally so apathetic. I'm a little zombie. So I go back to the doctor. I'm like, yes, the antipsychotics, they were something. They made me feel nothing, which is fine. But that wasn't really what I came in for help. I came in for help because, wait, hang on. I came to you because I needed help to do something. I think I'm depressed for a valid reason. I think I'm depressed because I'm not doing literally anything and I'm staying in bed for days. So I'm wondering if you could actually just give me some ADHD medication so that I could do something and then I bet I wouldn't feel depressed. She goes, I think we should up the antipsychotics. It was crazy. Like, I don't even know. The medication was lit. I'm not going to lie. It was a nice break from life, but it was not what I needed, okay? I didn't need to turn off. The third time I go back, I'm a little bit firmer. I'm like, this medication is not working. I want ADHD meds. This is what I came here for. You're not helping me. You're completely ignoring my issues. Like, what is going on? She goes, I don't believe that ADHD is a real issue. So you're going to have to go to your regular doctor if you want to get ADHD meds because I'm not going to prescribe them to you. Are you kidding me? I literally wrote on my referral that I needed ADHD meds, and they sent me to a psychiatrist that thinks I'm a drug lady. Now that I think about it, it also could have been the whole like addict thing that might have been an issue. But you know what? I am med seeking. Give me the meds. So I go back to my family doctor and I'm like, the psychiatrist did nothing for me. And my old family doctor had retired by this point. This was a new lady who didn't even know me, didn't know any of my history. And she's like, oh my God, that's crazy. Well, I just read about this new medication. Why don't you try this? It was Vyvanse. Here we are 3 years later. I'm a lot better. People don't really realize just how debilitating ADHD can be. It is like it's not fun, you guys. Like, it's a major cognitive difference. People with ADHD really struggle with emotional regulation. And this, oh my gosh, when I finally went on medication, it helped so much.
What I didn't know at the time, but was like being very emotional. Like, I was always very emotional and I would cry very easily as a kid. Yeah. And then I get picked on because I cried so easily. And it was always just like, just stop crying. And I was like, I can't. I literally cannot stop crying.
The overstimulation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of it was like crying out of frustration. And then like, because you're like socialized to cry instead of like being angry as a girl or a woman. So then it was like a lot of crying out of anger. And then it was always like, you're being so emotional. And I was always like, but why am I the more emotional one? Right? Yeah. And so sometimes you're just like, I'm being emotional because what I'm being asked to do is silly. Yeah. And this is my reaction to it. And you're uncomfortable with it.
That is so true. I used to feel just so guilty a lot of the time because I was so emotional. Yes. When it's not really that big of a deal. No. Like, everybody has emotions and like my brain works differently.
Also, do you find, like, I would find if a person would acknowledge the emotion, then it was so much easier to get past it. So someone's like, oh, I see you're really upset.
So true.
And then sometimes that you would just be crying and they'd be like, oh, I see you're crying. Okay. And then they would move on. And then all of a sudden you'd stop crying and move on.
Completely.
But as soon as people would be like, why are you upset? Then you would like dig in. Like, it was almost like a self-protection.
You had to like prove it. Yeah. You had to prove that you had a reason, especially if it happened like multiple times. You're like, nobody's going to believe me that I'm upset. Yeah. It's so true. Something that Oh, I actually just lost my train of thought because I was looking at that camera. But emotions.
Classic ADHD. I just lost my train of thought.
No, literally. Okay, we've made it to the final disclaimer. Super, super important to remember that Andrea and I do not represent the entire community of neurodivergence. There are a lot of intersections to consider, and no two people really present the same way. So if you think you have ADHD, you might, but you also might not. When we're talking about diagnosing ourselves with Instagram, we don't mean actually just looking at a meme and then saying, oh, I definitely have ADHD. It can be a bit of a catalyst for you to look inwards. If you really think that you are neurodivergent, make sure that you're reading the DSM and looking at proper studies and reading testimonials and looking at multiple perspectives, because you have to be really honest with yourself. These symptoms are something that really everybody faces to a certain extent. It's just that for people who are neurodivergent, they become debilitating or they're experienced on a much higher level. Make sure you know the difference. I encourage you to broaden your perspective of what ADHD looks like. It is a disability, but that's because of the way our society is set up. If our society was set up vastly different, I don't know if ADHD would be considered a disability. The best kind of support that helps me is education. The more that my friends and family know about it, the more I feel seen and understood. I've attached some books and studies to this episode if you want to learn more. Everybody experiences a lot of the symptoms of ADHD, but the difference is, does it debilitate your life? Sure, it can be hard to make decisions sometimes and you get kind of stuck between two things, but do you ever get stuck between two things for 8 hours and you're stuck on the couch and you can't get up because you're stuck between two things? Like, that's sort of the difference that we're talking about. And yes, it does come with a lot of like cool superpowers and like fun little like genius vibe things, but it is really debilitating. It is an actual cognitive difference. It's a chemical imbalance. There's a real, it's serious things are happening inside of my brain, okay? It can be super, super difficult to navigate in like a regular world and society. For a lot of people, this really shows up in school because, of course, school isn't really meant to educate people, in my opinion. School is there to create workers, let's be honest. So for people with ADHD, that rigidity can be a really difficult thing to get past. For me, it was super hard. I only did well in the subjects that I was interested in. Like I got a 99% in English, but like I failed math.
A lot of people, as a diagnostic criteria, will talk about people struggling in school. I didn't struggle. I got A's and B's.
Interesting.
I would usually struggle if I got bored. And I wasn't terrific at math, but like if I worked at it, I was like good enough to get 80s. Fine.
You need to be challenged.
Yeah, and oftentimes, like I remember I would read in class because I'd just get bored and read. Or then I would get, I'd be described as like argumentative. And it's not so much that I was like arguing, but like sometimes people would say, you know, this is how something is. And I'd say, why? And they would say, because. I'm like, that's not a good enough reason. Right?
It's, you need like I need you to explain to me why that shouldn't happen, because I'm too smart for you to just say just because.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then also I was a voracious reader and I was self-taught. So all of that would mask any sort of, I shouldn't say I was self-taught. Obviously my parents read to me, but like I would challenge myself and read like much more like higher level books and stuff. And I think that really hid like other issues, right? Like emotionally immature, but intellectually mature.
Right. Yeah. You know, that's funny because I almost, it sounds
so was that like it for you?
Well, it sounds like you challenged yourself. And I definitely was challenged in the areas that I excelled in, which was dance and performance. But in school, I was not challenged. And I just didn't pick up the information. Yeah. Like simply at all.
The worst thing is to be bored.
Oh, I would rather stick forks in my eyes. I was gonna say
yes. Okay, but so you know, there's a reason why like a lot of people with ADHD go into journalism, and like it's the adrenaline of a deadline.
It's crazy.
I can't work good if you give me a 3-day deadline for something that's not that big, but you give me an hour and I fucking nail it.
Oh, pressure, babe, kryptonite. Give it to me.
It's just like how you get all the. My boss is not watching this. You get all your work done in the last hour of the day.
Oh my God, no.
On Friday, because you're like, I guess I got to do it now.
No, literally. I'm training as a yoga teacher right now with Lahari Yoga and Donna Freeman. And in class, they taught us about the theory of multiple intelligences. So the theory of multiple intelligences was proposed by psychologist Howard Gardner in 1983. Yes, I'm reading a script. It basically challenges the traditional view of intelligence as like some single thing that's measured by IQ. Gardner identified a variety of different intelligences that show all the different ways people process and think and learn. The one one we most often think of is logical mathematical intelligence. So this is like the capacity for problem solving, reasoning, logical things. This is most associated with mathematical and scientific thinking. But then there's also linguistic intelligence. So the ability to read and speak very effectively. There's also spatial intelligence, which is the ability to kind of visualize things in 3D. So for example, I'm an incredible parallel parker. Then there's musical intelligence, which is pretty self-explanatory, the skill in composing and being able to attune to different musical thingamajiggies. There's bodily kinesthetic intelligence, the capacity to use one's body effectively for expression or manipulating objects. Athletes, dancers, surgeons. There's also interpersonal intelligence, which is the ability to kind of like understand and intuitively work with others. Intrapersonal intelligence, the ability to understand yourself and what's going on. He also believes that there's naturalistic intelligence, which is the ability to recognize plants and things in nature. And finally, he added existential intelligence, which is related to really deep questions about existence and humanity. I think this idea is so awesome. It promotes a much broader understanding of intelligence. And it's also just like really nice to know that it's okay if maybe you're not that logical. There are other things you're good at. I wish that I could go back and tell younger me about those different intelligences. I wish I could go back and say, it's okay because you have interpersonal intelligence, babe. Oh, when I was a kid, I felt so lonely, and I wish that I was diagnosed younger because connecting with others was a really serious issue for me. I read that somewhere actually, that people who have ADHD often gravitate towards each other.
Yes.
And I think it could be the conversation style because it's stimulating. Like,
and
we
it's
talk
familiar.
Fast.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
See,
an interesting
I also
point.
think that this has accounted for my whole dating life.
I'm so excited to hear.
So you know how we all see like an Instagram relationship expert. They have their slides, all their things. They're always yelling at you like, it's your anxious attachment.
You're just terrified.
You don't like this person. You're just chasing them. I would venture a new slide. You don't like this person. You both just have ADHD.
Bro, that is so
If someone
accurate.
could have told me that at 20, I might have dated fewer people that were actually not kind people, but that I thought I vibed with. Yeah.
It's like a hyperfixation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But
oh
also,
my gosh.
I think the conversational style, multitudes of interests, high energy.
Hobbies.
If you're a high energy person,
that's
right?
true.
That vibes.
Yeah.
And then also like people that think outside the box a little bit, you know?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm more attracted to people who think a little bit differently and like approach things in a unique way. And I also like people who are like stern in their world and their boundaries and their morals, but like open-minded.
Yes.
And I think that's very ADHD because they can be very rigid, but they're also so open to learning new things.
Yeah.
Like I really like that energy. Yeah. I find it easier to talk to almost.
Yeah.
People who like
and
rules.
then also they're the kind of person who will be like, would you like to go to Tulum this weekend? And you're like, yes.
Hell yeah.
And all your friends are like, that's not going to work out. And you're like, sure it will. And then you're like, it didn't work out. They're like, I told you. And you're like, but sex was hot.
I love the ways that we can connect, and your ADHD friends are the ones.
I also just like when I can just be like slow walkers and you're like, I know.
Yeah.
I saw something the other day that it gave me pause, but I wanted to talk with you about this. Oh. Someone was like, no more jokes about slow walkers because it's ableist. And I was like, it is actually. That's true. Yeah, you're right.
That's a really good point.
But then I was like, you know what? I reserve my rage for the people who do not have any sort of disability or something and are choosing to be slow walkers.
Able-bodied slow walkers.
Able-bodied.
Trash.
Able-bodied, able-brained slow walkers.
Able-bodied, able-brained slow walkers.
Yes.
Get rid of them.
Those are the only people.
After I got medicated, I started to notice these other symptoms really pop up. And I started thinking a little bit more about autism, which was, I had considered, I had an inkling. Like, I remember when I was really young, I thought that I was on the spectrum, but I sort of brushed it off. And then once the ADHD diagnosis came out, I was like, oh, that's the answer. But it wasn't the answer. There was more things going on, and there were slight differences between me and other ADHDers.
Why are people talking loudly? Why aren't they listening? Why aren't they following the rule? That's not the rule. Why doesn't it matter? But then I was also like, well, that is really annoying. They aren't following the rules, and it's ruining the game. Yeah. But like in my head, like
it's not like debilitating to you.
It's not like having a rock in my sock.
Yeah.
Would that be the same for you? Would you have the same reaction?
It's a really good way of putting it. Oh, totally. I actually, as you were saying that, I realized the big difference that I've noticed between ADHD and autism is the comfortability with unpredictability.
Yes.
ADHD is down for things being unpredictable. Mm-hmm. I would rather leave. I just cannot. I just know for myself that I'm so afraid of my meltdowns, and they're so hard to go through, that the thought of something not being what they said it was.
Yeah.
That something might happen that might trigger me to a meltdown, and I might not like it. Being uncomfortable is so incredibly like debilitating.
Yeah.
That it just causes this like, it's just so hard to deal with. It's like, but you said,
Yeah.
like, you can't change the plan. It's
Yes.
just, it's really, yeah. And that something is ADHD. I don't think that's not something.
I love a changed plan.
Yeah. Like you were just saying, like, call me on the day. I do kind of agree with the, like, I like something spontaneous. I need like a day.
I'm actually really glad that you shared about this because sometimes, like, when a plan has to change, I'm just like, okay, we change it. Yeah. But like sometimes depending on who you're with, it can be really upsetting for that person.
Yeah.
And as an ADHDer, I get really impatient. I'm like, why do you care? What does it matter? It'll be fine.
Yeah.
But it's also because in my head, I'm just like, it's fine. I can still see that outcome. But for some people, maybe it's just harder to see that outcome being fine, or it's like, oh, I didn't think through all the angles.
And that sucks because impatience is a really difficult thing to deal with ADHD.
Oh my God.
When somebody like interrupts you in the middle of stuff or is talking slow.
Slow talkers and slow walkers.
Jail. Like
straight to jail. Straight away.
Literally get
right
rid
away.
Of them.
Go.
Oh my God. The first time I went to New York, I was like, these are my people. Like, they walk so fast.
So fast.
I love it. Even more than Toronto.
Yeah.
Like, Toronto has some...
But also, this is beyond pet peeve. It becomes a safety issue when people stop at the top or the bottom of an escalator. I will not hesitate to push you out of the way. Do not stop there.
Yes.
It is dangerous.
Yes. It's also a safety issue if you stop on the sidewalk because I will kick you in the ass. So watch out.
I think I have sensory issues, or I don't think I have the same ones that you do. Because I remember when you were having, you were talking about like, creating a place in your house to go when you get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's that?
Yeah, no, you were like...
I was like, I'm sensory seeking. Go put me in a loud ass club.
That is crazy.
I have gone through 4 therapists and none of them has helped me as much as me just like knowing what was going on in my own brain and meds. So
true.
Let's be real.
Yeah, meds are lit.
Yeah.
Love meds.
I also want to say this because I know a lot of people are like, you're just doing it for the meds, or you're just like, I think there's like a lot of stigma, or like people think that it's like made up, but it's really night and day in terms of like not ruminating, not having circular thought patterns, being able to let things go, solving problems really quickly. It's not even so much that I sit there and like I go in a hyper focus, but it's more just like the general like low level life existence is just like, it's really easy to not overthink.
Yeah,
and that matters so much. Yeah, it's more tolerable.
That is such a good point.
I mean, you still have to like, you know, take care of yourself, obviously.
Working out and being active and being stimulated. Like you can't just do meds. It has to be in conjunction with other coping mechanisms.
Yeah, and like for some people, meds might not work.
Yeah.
I actually read some really interesting stuff about meds for people with ADHD and autism. And then the meds, if you take the meds and you don't know you have autism, they may not work as well, or because the ADHD is taken care of, then all of your autism symptoms come out, and then you're like, what's going on?
It is exactly what happened to me.
Tell me more.
Completely.
Tell me more.
Yeah, I went on the meds, and then I was like, everything is black and white. I must have a plan for everything. Like, it was like, for sure.
Oh, so that literally happened.
Yeah, after ADHD, I was like, oh, this is my answer. So it wasn't until like a year in, I was like, I'm still missing something. I had an awful experience trying to get an autism diagnosis. I ended up going to a private clinic, and the psychiatrist spoke to me for like 15 minutes before making up his mind. And instead of diagnosing me with autism, he actually diagnosed me with another personality disorder. Woohoo! I've made peace with not having a diagnosis. I don't agree. And I know myself well, and it feels wrong to disagree with a psychiatrist, like a doctor, right? They're supposed to be the be all and end all. They're supposed to know. But he didn't know. I really wanted to do this episode because I just wanted to give you a piece of my soul, a really vulnerable piece of my soul, in the hopes that anybody watching this who has been kind of shunned by doctors or who has just felt so confused on this journey, just know that you're not alone. You know, I don't even really have the answer. I'm doing pretty well. Oh my God, there's a bug on me. It doesn't really matter if I have a diagnosis because ever since I started thinking about myself for the last couple of years, I've been using strategies that help people with autism, and they're helping me. And I've been a lot happier and I've been feeling a lot better ever since I started doing that. So I'm going to keep doing it, whether he thinks I'm autistic or not. The brains are so much more powerful than we give them credit for. One of the most healing things I watched in rehab was a whole TED talk about neuroplasticity, about how you could change these pathways in your brain. So you actually can think differently. You actually can feel better and feel happier. It is actually possible, and it's very in your grasp. Like, it's very simple. It's not easy. It's very simple, but it's definitely not easy. I can feel better. Like I can. It is a possibility. It's not out of my reach. And if you're struggling, or if someone you know is struggling, always connect, even when it's really, really hard. For your really happy friends, check on them. I'm that friend. I'm that friend that probably most people wouldn't really expect to be deeply, deeply struggling, but c'est la vie. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about today's outfit, or lack thereof. Today's outfit is called Still Mine. I'm naked on the beach.
I also didn't put on any makeup or like do my hair really. I kind of just wanted to be fully exposed in honor of such a vulnerable episode.
And my sign says Still Mine because even though I am displayed and exposed, or whatever you want to call, it's still mine. It's still my body. It's still my stories. Just because I choose to share them with you doesn't make them yours. So keep that in mind before you judge me too hard in the comments. Remember that I am a real person. Thank you so much for opening your mind up with me today. Don't forget to be kind to yourself and to others. Okay? Love you. Bye.